For those of you who do not know me, my name is Kim Douthit. I work with Spooked in Seattle as a tour guide. I do their true crime tours. I also work there doing their paranormal tours and work as a paranormal investigator. I panel and teach classes and speak on true crime. I also have a podcast called Ghoulish Tendencies, and we did cover this case on the podcast, but I have gone even a little bit more in depth than I did there. Jake Bird, and I know it's kind of weird to say that I was really excited when we decided to cover him, but he's a really interesting character. And part of why I'm really interested in him is how little he has been talked about. Generally, when I bring him up, even on my true crime tours, most people have not heard of him. So we're going to be talking about him today and his crimes and some of his supposed crimes and what we do know about his life. Now, on October 3rd of 1947, Jake Bird broke into the home of Bertha Kludt, 52, and her daughter, 17-year-old Beverly Kludt. It was very early. He took his shoes off so he could better move around quietly. He grabbed an axe from the shed nearby. Allegedly, he was just there for a simple robbery. He was trying to find a home that had an unlocked door, and he found one. He snuck around the house, entered Bertha's bedroom, and took $1.50 from her purse. Bertha woke up and started screaming, and her screams brought her daughter downstairs. These would be the last sounds Beverly and Bertha would ever make. Now, at about 2:30 a.m., 2 police officers had been reported to 1007 South 21st Street in Tacoma, Washington, answering the report of screams. As they got closer, they saw a barefoot African-American man running from the back door of the home, crashing through a picket fence. At 2:30 a.m., that is fairly suspicious, so they pursued. He jumped fences. Eventually, though, he hit one that was too tall for him to jump over. He stopped. The police got closer to him and cornered him. He pulled out a jackknife, attacked the officers. He cut one of them on the hand, stabbed another one in the shoulder. They managed to subdue him and took him to Tacoma General Hospital to receive treatment for his wounds. He was covered in blood and brain tissue. As the officers entered the home of Bertha and Beverly, they were horrified. They found the 2 women bludgeoned. They had been hit repeatedly in the head with an axe. The axe had been left behind at the crime scene. There was also what appeared to have been, it appeared that Beverly had been sexually assaulted, although it didn't look like he was able to fully go through with his assault. Her body was found in the bedroom of, which was right off the kitchen. It was clad only in a pajama top. Her daughter's body was found in the kitchen, her head caved in. The attacker was identified as Jake Bird, an approximately 45-year-old transient. We don't have a lot of details on his early life. He was born somewhere in Louisiana around December 14th of 1901 to Charles and Delia Bird. Some of the reports will say that specifically it was Greenwood, Louisiana. Jake Bird himself would only disclose that the town he was born in was, quote, somewhere out in Louisiana where there ain't no post office. He left home at 19, which was around 1920, and he was what we'd call a good old-fashioned hobo. He also would work as a gandy dancer. That was slang that used to refer to men who would work the railroad, primarily doing work on the train tracks. So he'd travel around by rail, do work, keep traveling around the country. He had an extensive criminal record for rape, assault, robbery, attempted murder, and murder. He gave a full confession, although his version of events was a little bit different. He maintained he had only ever gone into the home to rob them, and that when Bertha discovered him, he even said to her, "I just want your money." He claimed that he was carrying the axe just to try to scare them, and that Beverly attacked him from behind, and he was forced to defend himself against her attacks by killing her and Bertha with an axe. He said that he only ran from the police and fought them because he was afraid they'd shoot him. He was formally charged with Bertha's death. He was not charged with Beverly's death. He was charged on the 31st of October, 1947. He pled not guilty. Trial was scheduled for November 14th of 1947. This was back when a speedy trial genuinely meant something. They started to debate as to whether or not they should seek the death penalty. And their argument was that they'd be better served to see what information he might have on some other cases and serving a life term. He had already been kind of alluding to possible involvement in some other cases. We saw that with those of you who joined us for Gary Ridgway. That was the exact argument made as to why they didn't give him the death penalty. But ultimately, they opted not to, and they pursued first-degree murder. Jury selection was difficult. There was a lot of doubt that a Black man would be able to receive a fair and unbiased trial in 1947. Now, they did finally pick a jury. The trial itself was very quick. There was only a day and a half of testimony. Prosecutors wanted to prove that his attack was premeditated, because in doing so, they could then seek the death penalty. And one of the reasons they initially only charged him with Bertha's death was if for some reason he was found not guilty, they had Beverly's there on the table they could charge him with. So that was a nice little safety card. But the evidence was just stacked against him. They had him fleeing the scene. He was literally covered in brain tissue. His clothing was covered in blood and brain tissue. There was bloody fingerprints, his bloody fingerprints on the axe, and they had his confession. Now, the defense would argue the confession had been received under duress. So the state introduced a surprise witness, which was Tacoma police officer John Hickey, who testified that he and Officer Russell Scadam, the two who had responded to the home, gave Bird a beating while he was in their custody. And the state wanted to introduce that so that the defense couldn't. Hickey said, and I quote, "I regret to say that I lost my temper after returning from the Kludt home and viewing the terribly hacked bodies of the two women. I had asked Bird as we sat in the patrol wagon why he murdered the two women. He said he didn't do it. I asked him, who did it then? And he said, it was Leroy. Who's Leroy? I asked him. Oh, another Negro around town, Bird replied. You're lying, I replied. And he looked at me with a smug and insolent look. I know I shouldn't have done it, but I hit him in the jaw with my fist, knocking him to the front of the patrol wagon. Then I struck him a number of times with my nightstick until he said, don't kill me. That brought me to my senses, and we took him to the hospital where a nurse said he wasn't badly hurt." Despite the fact that on the record, the police admitted to beating him, the confession still stood. Now, the defense would argue that shoddy evidence collection and storage had tainted the evidence, that the police had wrapped evidence together, which allowed cross-contamination. And it wasn't a bad defense. You would think, some years later, O.J. Simpson would make a similar defense, and it actually worked for him. The jury deliberated for 35 minutes and found him guilty. On December 6th of 1947, Judge Hodge sentenced him to the gallows at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. His execution was set for January 16th of 1948. Now, his attorney, J.W. Selden, had said he did everything he could and he would not be appealing. He actually said, I feel whenever any man, 45 years old, gets an idea that no lives are safe to anyone except his own, that man is a detriment to society and should be obliterated. His own attorney said that on the record about him. Now, when the judge asked if Jake Bird had any comments, Jake Bird said, I was not given me no chance to defend myself. My own lawyer just asked you to hang me. So he would speak for a total of 20 minutes. And in the end, he said, all of you who had anything to do with my case will be punished. I am putting the Jake Bird hex on you. Mark my words, you will die before I do. This would become known as the Jake Bird hex. And what's really interesting about it is people did start dying. So within a year, 6 of the people involved with the trial had died. On Thursday, January 1st, 1948, the Judge Edward D. Hodge, the person who had presided over Bird's case, died of a heart attack. Now, this was just about a month after he'd had Bird in the courtroom and delivered the death sentence. He'd been in excellent health. On January or April, there was kind of conflicting sources on this. Under Sheriff Joseph Karpak, who helped in the arrest and obtained a confession from Bird, died of a heart attack. He was 46 years old. Another date where there was conflicting reports, it was either February or April of 1948, the chief court reporter, Ray Scott, died of, everyone, I feel like you know at this point what he died of, a heart attack. And he was described by people who knew him, healthy, never missed a day of work, but he still died of a heart attack. On Friday, June 11th of 1948, the other court reporter involved died of a heart attack. The detective, Lieutenant Sherman Lyons, who had questioned Bird after the murder, and he was the one who also quoted Bird about the hex, died of a heart attack. Seeing a trend here. On Friday, November 26, 1948, J.W. Selden, Jake Bird's words are sometimes hard. Jake Bird's court-appointed defense lawyer, the one that was like, this guy deserved what he got, died in his office on the first anniversary of Bird's sentencing. To be fair, he was 76. So that one's a little bit less of a surprise. There was also several journalists who reported that Jake Bird put a hex on his prison enemies, and some half a dozen of them also died. Although, to be fair, it's prison. I don't know. That one seems a little bit less substantial to me. And also one of his guards at Walla Walla State Penitentiary died of pneumonia, which I believe at that point is kind of a stretch because people do die. But still, it is rather strange. When he was specifically told about his former attorney's death, there was no love lost there. His response was to reference the Bible and say, rejoice when someone dies, feel bad when anyone is born. When he was asked about the hex, I apologize for these sirens at the moment, where I live is right by the hospital, so that does happen on occasion. When Jake Bird was questioned about his hex, he did say it was a lot of hooey. So I think it's something he said, but it is still pretty weird. Now, on December 7th of 1947, Jake Bird was taken to Walla Walla State Penitentiary to await his execution in just over a month. This is when he starts talking. He was quoted as saying, "A man can only die once, and I want to die with a clear conscience." So he starts confessing dozens and dozens of murders that he said he committed over the last 20 years. On January 6th of 1948, the prosecutor and a detective went to listen to his confession. And initially, they sort of thought he was just looking for a reprieve. He would kind of dangle out more details, but it worked. On January 15th, a 60-day stay of execution was granted. Because as they start investigating, it became clear this was not just talk. Of the 44 deaths he confessed to, 11 were substantiated enough that authorities were able to close cases. Now, as they're digging, crime after crime after crime is being unveiled. And what's really shocking about all of this is how surprisingly hard it was to get real information about these murders, given that the vast majority of them were brutal bludgeonings with an axe. So, according to him, his first kill seemed to have taken place in Los Angeles sometime around 1922 or 1923. He couldn't fully remember. He said that he killed an unknown grocer around Central Avenue during a robbery. He never knew the man's identity. He also claimed that he killed a black youth who seemed to have been a different person, also in Los Angeles. He almost killed a guard while he was in prison, serving a sentence in Utah. There we go. In July of 1928, he was traveling the rails. He met up with a man named Gordon Geiger, who was 18, and James Burwald. And James Burwald's picture is the one on the upper right. They were two young white men of means who were bumming around the country on a whim for fun, because for them, it was something to do for fun. It wasn't a way of life. The train stopped suddenly in Ashland, Nebraska. So a rail agent named Conrad Barth, and that is the gentleman on the lower right, he climbed on top of the car where they were riding, and he told them they had to get off the train. A fight started between the two men. Burwald ran away. Bird was struck several times, and Geiger was forcibly thrown from the rail car between the two cars by Conrad Barth, the rail agent. The train started up again, heading towards Omaha, and Geiger's right leg and left hand were crushed by the train. He was rushed to a hospital in nearby Omaha. A medical student offered himself for a blood transfusion, but he sadly passed away on the operating table, suffering from shock and loss of blood. According to one newspaper, his final words were, "Asshole pushed me under the wheels." I guess if you have to have final words be anything, that's one thing to do if you're pushed under a train. Bird was weirdly insistent that justice be done for this young man. So he agreed to remain in the area so he could testify as a witness. He was offered free lodging in the jail at Wahoo, Nebraska, but he declined, saying it was too hot. So instead, he settled in Omaha and started looking for employment. I don't know about a legitimate job, but this is where the murders start. November 18th of I missed the slide. Sorry about that. That was about him saying that he is helping them out. There we go. On November 18th of 1928, J.W. Blackman, age 74, was found in his home by his son. Now, when his son first came in, he thought his father was asleep because he was covered by a blanket. But after time passed and J.W. hadn't moved, his son grew concerned. When he lifted the blanket, he found his father covered in blood, dead. He had been bludgeoned with an axe, apparently while still asleep. The axe was found nearby. On November 19th, the very next day, Waldo Resso was heading home from work. That is Waldo in the lower left there. He lived with his wife, Gertrude, who is pictured above him. Their two children who you see pictured there, and his wife's sister, Credia Brown, who is to the right. When he got home, he found his wife murdered, his sister-in-law murdered. Gertrude had been choked and then bludgeoned with what appeared to have been an axe. Credia had been choked and beaten to death, possibly with a brick wrapped in cloth. Both women's clothing was stripped. It appeared they'd been assaulted sexually as well. He frantically started looking for his children. He found them miraculously unharmed in their room, but the baby had a bloody handprint on his face. So the killer had reached out and touched his face. The county attorney Beale was quoted as saying, "It is without question the foulest murder I have ever come in contact with in my 10 years as prosecutor in Douglas County." It was interesting to note while I was researching this that a lot of the articles written said they did not believe that this was connected to the Blackman case that had happened the day before, but that the axe wounds appeared identical. And I found that just rather odd that you wouldn't think two brutal axe murders happening in the same general area would be connected. Now, on November 20th, Mr. and Mrs. Stribling were attacked about 3 a.m. Mr. Stribling suffered skull fractures and was near death. Mrs. Stribling was struck in the face, and she reportedly begged for an hour for the attacker to spare her 1-year-old child. And what ultimately did it is she said to him, "God will strike you dead." That resonated for whatever reason with her attacker. So she was forced to go with him, and he eventually released her, but only after she promised she wouldn't turn him in. She did give a rather different description, but when he was brought before her for an identification, she said, "That's the man," and went into hysterics. There's a little bit of dispute, though, as to whether or not this was actually Jake Bird. Now, according to one paper, The Afro-American, the implication of Bird in the axe was, in these specific killings, was revenge for his testimony against Barth, the man who'd thrown Greiger from the train and who he was there to testify against. Because Bird said that the night of the Striblings' attack, he had been gambling with friends. And 20 people were willing to testify on his behalf. Even his landlady testified they'd seen him. But a juror said later that Mrs. Stribling was so certain it was him. She said, quote, "Before God and man, Jake Bird is the man who attacked me." And that was very convincing. But he maintained his innocence. A neighbor also identified Jake Bird, a woman named Mrs. Hawkins, who lived near the Striblings. And she said that an African-American man matching Jake Bird's description had stopped at her home demanding a cup of coffee and only left after she threatened to sick her dog on him and to get her shotgun. Now, the Striblings both survived the attack. That you can see a picture of him here in the hospital. Years later, Mr. Stribling would actually go on to shoot himself and his wife. Issue of the Oakland Tribune that came out on February 11th of 1959. He shot his wife in the early hours of the morning while she was sleeping and then turned the gun on himself. Miraculously, Mary was again not killed. She awoke at about 9 a.m., found her husband dead, herself shot, phoned her doctor, and then collapsed. She was in surgery for hours, but survived. Some people like to say that this all contributed to the Jake Bird hex, that this was a part of it. Honestly, the attack had happened decades before, and they were having financial problems. So I personally find it doubtful that it was a hex that did this. Now, Jake Bird was charged only with the Striblings' attack. He was not charged with those 2 axe slayings. He was sentenced to 30 years, but was released in 1941 after serving 12 years with good behavior. He wasn't paroled, but apparently had been such a model prisoner that he was able to gain release. So we're jumping ahead because he spent the last decade in jail. We are now up to September 22nd of 1942.
Kim?
Yes.
Tony wants to know if Jake was smuggling pork rinds out of prison.
Smuggling pork rinds out of prison? Not to my knowledge.
Well, everyone was having heart attacks.
Oh. No, you know, he wasn't like sending them in the mail or anything for have more cholesterol. That would be kind of amusing though, if that's what he was doing. Well, that's why I do find it interesting that specifically everybody had heart attacks. It'd be one thing if people just died, but they all had heart attacks. That is bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just after midnight, someone entered the Corporal house at 1138 West Jefferson Boulevard in South Bend, Indiana. It was night. Using a pipe, this person attacked John Corporal, 65 years old, and his wife, Stella, 62, and then their son, Ernest, 18. At the time, Ernest was a senior and a football star at South Bend Central Catholic High School and was described as being quite popular. Now, the bodies were found the next day at about 4:15 p.m. by Beverly Cohn, who was their upstairs neighbor. She found the back door unlocked and would often visit their home, so she went inside and found their bodies. They were found in their beds, heads crushed, sheets and pillows covering their faces. Blood stains that were found in Ernest's closet suggested to police that the killer had murdered his parents in their sleep and then went into Ernest's closet and waited because Ernest wasn't home. There was no sign of a struggle with John and Stella, but it looks like Ernest fought back and had been caught unaware. His body was then dragged into his bed. The floor and ceiling of his bedroom were covered in blood. There was no sign of a robbery or anything missing. The killer seemed to have come through an unlocked window and then left through the back door, leaving that unlocked for the neighbor to find the next day. A broken pipe with bloodstains was found in the basement. It was reported by the Tribune that a detailed investigation was hampered by the fact that a large number of police officers and others were permitted to walk through the house in the aftermath of the crime, tainting the scene. Bloody smudges were found throughout the home, but there was a lack of fingerprints, and that suggested that the killer had worn gloves. Initially, police were convinced it was the work of a relative who had been overheard making what was, quote, unfriendly remarks, but that investigation never went anywhere. Jake Bird would later say that he had done it during a bungled burglary. He claims he only killed the son and that another man who was with him killed the parents. The details he gave, however, were good enough that the case was closed. Now, I want to stress again, like, digging through papers and old newspapers trying to find information on his victims, this was difficult. He gave some confessions, but lacked a lot of details. So he said he killed a white man he described as a little fat man, cleft chin, wearing glasses, well-dressed, and 35 to 40 years of age. He said he slit his throat in Chicago on January 3rd or 4th of 1942, and then weighed the body down and dumped it in Lake Michigan. He said he killed another woman while he was trying to snatch her purse on a bridge and dumped her body in Lake Michigan. In September of 1942, he said he shot a delicatessen in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. He also confessed to being a part of the robbery and murders of Lillian Galvin and her maid, Edna Sablinski, on October 22nd of 1942. He claimed he was just a lookout. Now, this was a really high-profile case at the time. Lillian Galvin's husband was Paul Galvin, who was one of the founders of Motorola. Almost $30,000 worth of jewels were stolen from the home, as well as a $3,000 fur coat. The women were both shot to death, which wasn't really his MO, but he said, again, he was just the lookout, and he had confessed to shooting people in the past. He did try to implicate two other people he was acquainted with who were being looked at as suspects, but they would be cleared. And ultimately, whether or not he was involved, this one remains probably on the end of not being involved. He was considered for the murder of James Winfield in Davenport, Iowa, but there was also another suspect. Winfield was killed on September 3rd. The body wasn't found until the 7th. He was killed with an axe. Police and papers noted that there was resemblance between Bird and the other suspects. You can see the two of them here. In all honesty, I think the resemblance is purely that both are African American. Now, he said he killed a man about 40 and a woman who was about 25 shortly after he got into Cleveland, and he disposed of their bodies in the Bull Run River. He said he killed a man with a brick in the alley of Little Harlem, which is a club in Cleveland. He confessed to murdering Alta Fulkerson, age 36, on June 24th of 1942 in Highland Park, Illinois. This was unfortunately the only picture I could find of her. It was taken in 1917. She would have been about 10. So I'm not even sure which of the two girls she is. I believe she is the girl on the left. This is her pictured with a sister and her father. Her neighbor, Chester Lewis, was awoken about 3:30 a.m. hearing her screams. He started to get dressed to go downstairs to check on her, and his wife woke up and begged him to not go downstairs. She convinced him it was Alta's nephew who had been visiting her, and he was known to cry in his sleep, so he gave in and didn't check on her. Well, the next afternoon, he saw that she wasn't home, and it looked like there was things disturbed in her home. So he called the police. He helped with the search, and he would also be the one to find her body. She had been dragged into an area of brush and wood, choked, beaten with a rock. Her clothes were torn, and some of her clothing was found a distance from her body. Jake Bird would later say that it was him, and again, that magical accomplice, that she had woken up while they were in the middle of robbing her. She screamed when she saw him, which was that scream Chester Lewis heard, and that was when he killed her. On October 2nd of 1947, the body of 81-year-old Marie Manners was found in her Pueblo, Colorado home. At the time her body was found, they believe she'd been dead for several days. She was clad in her nightgown. She was found in the dining room in a pool of blood with a deep cut on her head. There were signs the body had been dragged through the house. Her purse was found in a pan of water in the sink, open. Initially, her death was ruled accidental. Authorities believe she'd fallen, struck her head, but that doesn't really account for the dragging of the body through the house, the purse in the sink, and Jake Bird would confess to killing her. And she hits all of his normal targets: women at home, possible robbery, blow to the head. Now, he confessed to killing an unnamed man on October 6th of 1947 in Ogden, Utah. They believe that man was Lee K. Walker. He was killed in his sleep on October 4th at around 2:30 a.m. Bird said that he was looking for a home with an unlocked door to rob. He found Walker's home. He entered, turned on the light, started ransacking the place. He went into the bedroom, turned on the light, and there was Walker asleep, snoring loudly in his bed. He did not awaken when the lights turned on. In spite of this, Bird still bludgeoned him. It appeared, though, that he bludgeoned him with the blunt side of the axe and then stabbed him with a butcher knife taken from a drawer in his own home. Both items would be found about 200 feet away from the property. Mr. Walker's wife would be the one to find him the next morning. And based on the details that Jake Bird gave on top of his confession, the case was officially listed as closed. He confessed to killing 3 other people that he described as too painful to discuss in Wisconsin, New Jersey, and Illinois. He also admitted to the killing of 8-year-old Harvey Boyd, who had disappeared on July 1st of 1928 and whose body was found a month later on August 2nd. This was in Omaha, which did match up with his timeline. However, a man named Clarence Lukehart was arrested for the murder, and Jake Bird had served time with him and was actually friendly with him. There was a fair amount of evidence against Clarence, including his own confession. So the belief was that Jake Bird was trying to cover for his friend and trying to get him out of prison. There's really nothing to point to him really being involved in this. And Jake Bird was never known to kill a child. If we think back to the murders he did at the one home, too, where there were children on premises, he left them alive. The warden at the prison was quoted as saying, "He's a fancy man with a tall yarn, and I sincerely believe it would be downright silly to fall for his stunt and make any trades with him. They have his confession, and they should hang Jake Bird." Now, police in Houston also wanted to question him about the death of a Mrs. Harry Richardson. I was not able to find a whole lot of details about that specific case. He'd also be questioned in the death of Mrs. Mortimer in Mexico, but her murder took place in 1937, and at that point in time, Jake Bird was still in prison for the attack of the Striplings. But that's a lot. A common theme throughout his confession was that he had an accomplice. Oftentimes an accomplice who magically did the bulk of the killing. Even with the Klutts, he said that it was him and a guy named Leroy. There's next to no evidence in any of these killings that there was anyone else involved. So even though he confessed to a couple dozen, there was only 11 that were closed. And you can obviously see that some of what he was saying was not truthful. He was confessing to stuff he didn't do, either to help out friends or gain notoriety or continue to stay his execution. A psychiatrist would visit him and label him a psychopath. He was declared a hedonistic killer, one that kills for pleasure. A large majority of his confirmed victims were white women. He'd kill for financial gain and probably also derived sexual pleasure from it. He never really showed any remorse for his kills. He was quoted once as saying, when he was asked if he ever regretted anything, "I hope none of the papers say it does because I ain't got no conscience." He was continuing his appeals. Law enforcement in other states that he had confessed to murders in were begging he be given another stay of execution. One telegram from the governor of Illinois on behalf of the police chief there said, "I urge you to stay the execution of Jake Bird to permit investigation of his confessions of the murder of 2 Evanston women." Unfortunately, his execution was scheduled to move forward. On July 14th of 1949, he ate his last meal, wrote down his last remarks. He was brought before 125 witnesses. Reportedly, as the clergyman was reading his last remarks, the lever was pulled, dropping Jake Bird the 5 feet to his death. He was pronounced dead 14 minutes later. He willed his personal fortune to his attorney at the time, Murray Taggart of Walla Walla. It totaled $6.15. This was his prison file. He was buried in a grave at Washington State Penitentiary. No name, just the number 292 on it. There are a handful of ghost stories associated with Jake Bird. One being in Tacoma. Pacific Brewing and Malting was said to be haunted by the ghost of Jake Bird. It was next door to the old City Hall building where he was kept in a jail during his trial. The ghost of Jake Bird is said to haunt the facilities where he once was housed. I had reached out to the former business owners of Pacific Brewing and Malting. They no longer in that location. And they responded with, "Well, we've definitely experienced some unexplained phenomena, mostly lights turning on and off and objects that moved when we weren't looking. Jail cells connect to the old City Hall. So if there is a ghost, it is certainly possible that it is the spirit of a former prisoner." Ghost Adventures also did an episode on Jake Bird. They investigated the squirrel cage jail where he was being held after he had attacked the Striplings. So this was decades before he was executed. This was in the 20s and 30s. So Ghost Adventures go in and they're right off the back. They're seeing strange activity. They were using a spirit box, which is a device used to contact spirits through the use of radio frequency. I'm not gonna lie, I watched it and I think I finally turned it off because I couldn't. They had a mannequin in the jail cell and they were yelling questions at the mannequin, and it all got to be so ridiculous that I couldn't take it seriously anymore. So I didn't get any further on that particular investigation. But I have to say, if his, I don't know why his spirit would be haunting that jail cell specifically. But it was a good example of the many oddities in his case. It's mostly known by people because of the hex and some of his supposed hauntings. When you say the name, they're like, oh, I've kind of heard of that. Didn't he hex people? Yet this is a guy who bludgeoned, brutally murdered over a dozen people with the possibility of a couple dozen. That's got Jack the Ripper beat, and yet we never talk about him. So it's my hope that we can bring a little bit more attention to this particular case, because it's one that I find particularly interesting, and I think there's still a lot more we have to uncover and to learn about it. So that is Jake Bird, and we will open up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. We're going to open up to questions if there are any. Bueller. Anyone? Or I could just do a little dance.
I did notice, I'm a little bit of a proofreader. Noticed on the governor's request for a stay of execution, he misspelled Illinois.
Well, I wwonder if that was the governor or if that was the telegraph office.
Oh yeah,
because that came in via telegram.
I was just thinking, like, how appropriate that was, considering
That's kind of amazing.
politics today. We are always talking about how politicians are all a little off. So,
well, and I will say something that made some of the research extra difficult is that the papers would misspell names, sometimes replace names. You'd see the name Jack in place of James a lot. Alta was sometimes referenced as Atta. And so even when I'm trying to scroll through and search newspapers, you'd have misspellings, making that even more challenging. But it's proofreading.
I mean, literacy rates weren't what they are today. So
oh, definitely, yeah. Well, and Jake Bird was really interesting too, because he had not had a whole lot of formal education, but he became known around the prison as kind of a little mini jailhouse lawyer because of how often he decided to represent himself in his appeals. So he was this kind of interesting scholar, even though he was not formally educated. I see a question in the chat. Why do you think Jake isn't talked about as much as other notorious serial killers? You know, I have a couple different theories on that, and one of them being his race. I think his race definitely plays into it. You do see a lot less attention given to non-white serial killers. In fact, there's a belief that there really aren't a whole lot of non-white serial killers, and that is very much not true. So I think that definitely contributes to it. I think the difficulty in finding information about him. I've been trying to compile as much information as I can, but there's no one source that has, like, there wasn't even one place that listed all the cases that were closed. That was me going through article after article, newspaper after newspaper from the 1940s to finally get a list of closed cases. So because no one has ever sat down and put all this information together, and this is, you know, not just pre-internet, but pre-television in everyone's home, you didn't have the attention on the case even then that you have today. I mean, this kind of case today, are you kidding me? It'd be all over. It'd be on the internet. It would be on Twitter. It would be everywhere. But in the 1940s, we didn't have that. And he was a transient. because he went all over the country, because you had some Axeman killings. You had like the Axeman in New Orleans, and that had the city in a panic because he was killing people in the same spot and writing letters. And there was this terror of this horrible serial killer. But in a lot of these cases, I mean, there's the one that they chalked up to an accident. There's ones that they didn't tie together, some that they just thought were a one of. You didn't have that build of everyone knows the Green River Killer because they know his MO. Everybody knew Ted Bundy because there was a pattern. They saw the pattern. No one saw the pattern until after he was caught. And at that point, it had been decades between some of these killings. So I think that contributed as well. Yes.
Kim,
Did they
Kim, the
ever
first-
find?
go
Sorry.
ahead, Tony. I'm sorry, go
Did
ahead.
they ever find any evidence that he was partnered with somebody that he, like he claimed?
No, there was never, he named a lot of people. Conveniently enough, a lot of the people he partnered with were he's like, I don't know, I met up with this transient guy. We decided to go rob a home, and then the person woke up, so we killed him. Those were his partners. There was like the mysterious Leroy. No Leroy was ever found. They were, I believe, all fabrications.
Okay.
I see in the chat, how many of the murders he confessed to do you think he actually committed? I think more so than what he was ultimately, like the cases that were closed for. I actually believe that some of those ones he can't remember a lot of details about. I actually believe he did that, because it's one thing to lie about a high profile case, be like, I also shot this guy. I don't know who he was. I just shot him when I was robbing him. So I think he probably killed at least 20 to 24. Whether or not he killed the 44 he confessed to, I don't think so. Most serial killers are kind of known to overblow their numbers. It's the ego stroke. But I definitely think it was more than what he is given credit for. Yeah.
The first two, Bertha,
Mm-hmm.
Bertha and the daughter.
His last two, really, but
well,
yeah.
okay. Well, the first two those were the
Yeah.
first two you talked about. The newspaper article said that she had 5 children.
Yes.
So do we know if perhaps any of the other 4 children might possibly still be alive?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I mean, they'd be probably in their 80s or something. But
Yeah, because she was the
Curious
youngest. That's why she was still at home.
I'm just curious if any of those children might still be alive.
It's possible. That's I'm gonna look into that, Mark. Thank you for giving me that idea. I've been reaching out to, because some of the information I found was via ancestry.com for some of the, like one of the pictures I got was from ancestry.com. And so I've reached out to a handful of relatives of some of the other victims. I haven't heard responses yet, but this is pretty recent that I've reached out to them. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at that.
It'd be interesting to know.
Yeah. Well, and
It could
it's
still possibly be in Tacoma. Who knows?
that's true. It's funny because the house is still there. I found some pictures of the house currently, and it's boarded up in parts, but
Oh, wow.
and been painted a very different color. But it is still there, and I always wonder, when you have a crime that's this old, nobody has to disclose that it's a murder house after this many decades. So I always wonder with some of these places that people have been in for that long, if they know that they are living in a murder house.
Yeah.
Oh, how did I find information on ancestry.com? If somebody has a public profile and they have searchable information, because I will sometimes put in people I can't find a lot of information on to see if I can pull up a picture or fill in some specific death dates or any other info on them. So a couple of the families have them up there, and even have a note in their family trees, was murdered by Jake Bird. And it's viewable to anyone who has an Ancestry account, and I shamelessly use my mother's Ancestry account. Hi, Mom. Shamelessly. I also use her newspapers.com account. Thank you, Mom. But Ancestry and newspaper.com are really fantastic sources of research for true crime, and I think Ancestry specifically is not one a lot of people think about, but it is good. It works. Other questions?
Have you thought about, you've done all of this research on all these different subjects. Have you thought about a book, doing a book? Writing a book?
Actually, Jake Bird is one I would like to write a book on. I have some of you are friends of mine in real life or family in real life, so you've seen the pictures of my murder wall I have on Jake Bird. I'm trying to do a deep dive on him specifically because nobody has ever written extensively on him. But man, it's it's a lot of work. I'm trying to contact a couple of some of his unknown unsolved deaths, some of the like the bodies in Lake Michigan and all that, trying to contact and figure out how to get old police records from the 20s and 30s. In some cases they don't exist anymore. But yeah, I definitely think at some point, maybe even something on Pacific Northwest, because I do enjoy Pacific Northwest true crime specifically. But I have a fondness for the cases that are forgotten. So that's why I gravitate towards a lot of older cases. Everybody knows we don't need another documentary or book on Ted Bundy. We don't. He's great. Interesting. There's plenty already out there. My interest is in the ones people have forgotten, because it also means that their victims are forgotten, and bringing attention to those and trying to uncover some of those details. So
I think you should do
it. I'll keep doing it.
Tim, it's kind of interesting because, especially considering, you know, that he was killing in the 40s.
Yeah.
And that he was a black man. There were so many times where he said, oh yeah, I totally murdered him or those people. And then everybody else was like, no, you didn't. And I was like, that's completely opposite of like everything we know about American history. So it's crazy that he was able to get away with stuff that he confessed to, essentially.
Well, I think it probably helped. I mean, most of the places were Midwest where he was caught, and he wasn't ever caught for murder until Tacoma. Before that, man, that guy had some luck because he kept getting caught and released. He kept getting caught, but he was, again, a model prisoner. So he may not have had formal learning, but guy had some street smarts. He knew when to turn on the charm and the good behavior and to be respectful, and when he didn't need to. But yeah, no, you're right. It is a miracle, because I sort of kept waiting to find something being like fear of, you know, killer will be lynched, that people would break into the prison. But I think because it was primarily he was caught in the Midwest, by that time you weren't seeing lynchings. If he'd done this in the South, I don't think he would have survived. Frankly, I don't think he would have lasted. Any other questions? You guys have some good questions though. I like it. Guess not. I was asked this last time, so this is my like moment of shamelessness, because we were asked about tips, and I do have a Venmo account. So my Venmo, I'm gonna put it into is Kim Douthit. I suppose it's at Kim Douthit technically. So you can see it there on my little window. Tips are appreciated, but never expected. There may be extra appreciated in the current time, but never expected.
Well, I guess before we wrap it up, let's promote some of the other stuff that we have going on. We'll probably be scheduling another Tea and True Crime soon. Mm-hmm. But starting Tuesday, and it's going to be Tuesday and Thursdays, and it will go through the end of May, I guess. Ross is going to be doing his ghost school on a variety of different subjects.
It did drop once.
Tuesday.
20 minutes after I spoke to you, but once it.
I guess I'll mute Ray.
I was going to say, I think you need to mute Ray.
Anyway, Tuesday is Ghostology 101, and then Thursday, I believe that's paranormal journaling. But there's there's a variety of subjects that he's going to be covering Tuesdays and Thursdays at I think it's 6 or 7 p.m. Pacific time, starting this coming Tuesday. On Friday night at 7 o'clock Pacific, we're going to be traveling on the spooky side with June.
Yes.
And she's going to talk about some of her experiences on her travels all over the world. And then on Saturday at 7, Ross is going to be doing his spooky bedtime stories.
Oh, that should be fun.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Dolly Parton's been reading bedtime stories for the past few weeks, so we're gonna kind of get involved in that, and Ross is gonna
nice
talk
little
about
scary story before
yeah,
bed.
So has LeVar Burton.
Ghost
We got some competition.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So all the information is, you can either find the Facebook events on the Spooked in Seattle page on Facebook, or you can just go to spookedinseattle.com and go to the tours. What is it? Tours, events, and tours.
Yeah, I think
Hunt, ghost tours,
sounds
ghost
right-ish.
hunts, and special events, or whatever the page is, and then you can find the information there. So we, and then we'll be coming up with some other stuff too. So trying to get us through this crazy time. So.
And I've got Son of Sam now on my list of ones to look at, but we are always open to suggestions for cases for tea and true crime people would like us to cover. If you enjoy this as well, I have a podcast called Ghoulish Tendencies where we talk about a lot of true crime, a lot of older true crime, particularly a lot of ones associated with ghost stories, because that gets to combine some of my great loves. So you can check that out. You can find us wherever podcasts are distributed, all of the main ones. Yeah.
We're also working on a kind of a virtual Pioneer Square ghost tour. That people can do that online. And you know what, we might even continue some of this stuff maybe even after this is over with and we're able to actually do physical tours. We might even continue some of this stuff because it enables people like Tony and Linda that are not here, to take advantage of some of this stuff that they can't do when we do it in person. So I think it's a good thing. So
yeah, that would be nice.
This is great.
Detroit here.
Detroit. Yep.
Oh, awesome.
Kim, can you put the name of your podcast in the chat?
Oh, yes. Certainly. Oops.
Ooh, Albert Fish, the boogeyman of Brooklyn.
Yeah, Albert Fish, that'd be a great one to do, because that's a nice historical one, and oh man, that is a messed up case.
Well, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, was also born in Brooklyn.
Got a lot of New York serial killers.
Geez, so are you, Tony.
I was born in Brooklyn too.
And you got Long Island serial killer too.
Should I lock my door tonight?
Long Island serial killer too is a really interesting one. That's a really contemporary one too. That's one that's come out the last decade or so. We've learned a lot more about that because that's when we started finding the bodies.
Kim, I just listened to a podcast about Belle Gunness.
Nice. Yes. Yes. I love Belle. Listen, I know I shouldn't say things like, I love that person, but Belle Gunness is fantastic because this is not only a female serial killer, but a female serial killer who got away with so much. That's a bonkers case. I think I had her on my list to cover even before this, but coming as, a woman in your 30s, you were like, I feel you, Belle. Like I kind of get it, but she's interesting because she was the Black Widow, but she didn't commonly kill by poison. Like she straight up hacked at people. She's straight up like,
and that's unusual for a woman.
She's one of the few female serial killers who derives sexual satisfaction from her kills, and that's unusual for women. One of my favorite kills, though, was one of her early husbands. I can't remember if it was her first. I think it was her first husband, who there was a life insurance policy out on him. And it was expiring. So she was getting another life insurance policy on him with a different company. And they overlapped by one day. There was one day where there was 1 day left of this life insurance policy, and the new one had just started. And wouldn't you know it, he died on that one day. So she got 2 life insurance policies.
Yeah, that was her first husband. I mean, come on, that's just too tempting to give up.
Yeah, well, and then the one that was hit in the head with like the meat grinder. And she was so upset. He was bludgeoned with a meat grinder. It was a horrible accident. How could that have happened?
And that's the podcast that I was listening to said that they think one of the reasons why she was able to get away with it for so long is because she would do like the whole female hysterics.
Oh yeah. Yeah. She would play that up.
And so the law was just like, well, you know, she's so upset and how could she be responsible? Because she's just a woman.
I mean, like, I'm not advocating being a female serial killer, but I'm also like, you know what? If they're not going to take you seriously because you're a woman, you may as well work that. Like, oh no, I'm just a lady. What can I
Kim,
do?
there doesn't seem to be any shortage of material on serial killers.
There's never a shortage of material. There's so much to go. And again, I like covering some of the things that are not covered as often, because I think there's a lot of really fascinating cases out there that people have never heard of. Even true crime enthusiasts have not heard of, and it's nice to be able to shed some light on some of those. Yeah,
I think we talked about Blanche Taylor Moore. Didn't we talk about that?
Yes.
She's still alive.
Yeah.
That's another one that Elizabeth Montgomery played in a TV movie. She killed her father, her husband, her first husband, her friend.
Her friends. Yeah.
And then she used like arsenic poisoning. Like she used like anti-ant or whatever they called it. And she tried to kill her. She married the preacher and she tried to kill him, and but he survived. And he died a couple years ago, but she's still alive.
She's still alive. Well, and like Mary Bell, we did the Tea and True Crime on Mary Bell, who's another female serial killer who was 11 when she started.
Mary Bell, I went to that Tea and True Crime. That was crazy story.
Yeah.
She is quite a character.
And still alive. Yeah. And out of prison. Because she was never actually in prison. She was in a juvenile detention facility and then a hospital and was released in her mid-20s. So she's out and about, living her life, has a kid, has a grandkid. Yeah.
Or, is it Anne Perry, the author that was convicted of murder when she was younger? I know one of the...
Yeah. Because the Heavenly Creatures movie was based on her and her friend who killed her. I can't remember which one of them's mother they murdered, but they murdered one of their mothers because they were trying to keep them apart. Yeah. Was that New Zealand?
That sounds familiar. I heard it on, I was listening to that Spooky the other day, if you've heard that podcast.
Yeah.
And they talk about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting case, because I think one of the stipulations, they were both young when they did it. They were both teenagers. Well, one of the stipulations when they were released was that they could never see each other again. And as far as I know, they never have. Yeah, it was a good movie too. It was who was it that I'm completely blanking on the director, but it was one of his first.
Peter Jackson.
Yes, yeah, Peter Jackson. Thank you. It was one of his first films. And Kate Winslet and I can't remember the other actress, but she's also fantastic. I always remember as the sister from Ever After. Anyway,
Melanie Linsky.
Yes, I love her. Yeah.
Was that New Zealand, or was New Zealand the Slender Man case?
No, the Slender Man case was.
That's the U.S.
That's U.S.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, the girl involved just recently gave her first interview about it. The girl
really?
It's on I have the episode of 2020 on my DVR. But she only recently started publicly speaking on it. For years she didn't. I don't blame her. She was 12 when it happened and was stabbed by her friends. That's another case that is kind of bonkers and sad. That one's very sad. I think any cases where you have very mentally disturbed children who are doing things are sad. But especially because we don't really have a good system for how to help kids with that level of problems. Anyway. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful. You all have been wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And we
And,
did record
Let us
this.
know when the next one is.
We definitely will. And we did record this, so if anybody wants the link to the recording and if you want to watch it again, just let us know and we'll send it to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.